Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of March of the Machine Commander deck techs. I've covered every legendary creature from March of the Machine's main set, plus the extra legends from Mom Jumpstart and the special pre-release promos, and now I'm finishing things up with the non-face legends from the Mom Commander product. Check out the playlist linked in the video's description if you want to see all the things I've put together, and if you have a request for the last 3 decks that I'm going to be building, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Rashmi and Ragavan, respectively the Aetherseer, who gave us what would become the Planar Bridge, a pivotal creation in the events that led to the War of the Spark, and a monkey. Ragavan is Kari Zev's partner on her Avishkari pirate ship, and he's working with Rashmi on this card because his partner is busy teaming up with Baral. See the video's description for my Baral and Kari Zev deck. That card also makes a Ragavan, but this one is a little closer to the Ragavan who's committed the most crimes. Modern Horizons. Anyway, Rashmi and Ragavan is a cool card, and I'm excited to share what I cooked up for it. But before we get to that, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I put it at the head of my deck. So we put about 30 cards toward doing whatever it wants me to do. That's our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. I put 30 more cards toward supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. Sometimes I run more than 2 wraths, sometimes I run no wraths, but usually 1 or 2 sweepers just to keep the board clear whenever it needs to be cleared. And I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I always hit my land drops and I can cast my spells. So let's talk about our team-up commander. Rashmi and Ragavan is a 2/4 legendary elf monkey, an elf and a monkey, for 1 and Teamer, a green, a blue, and a red. It only has one ability, which is whenever we cast our first spell during each of our turns, we exile the top card of target opponent's library and we make a treasure token. We can then cast that exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than the number of artifacts we control. Less than, not less than or equal to. And if we don't cast it this way, then we have permission to cast it the rest of the turn, and obviously we can use that treasure to cast it for its mana cost, even if it's not in our colors. Okay, I'm going to admit this up top. This deck is a mess. We have a skyship load of predefined tokens in this deck, from clues to treasures to foods to more esoteric things like landers and meteorites. It's probably a good idea to have a pack of tokens ready when you play this, as well as dice to indicate how many of each you have on your playmat before things get too crowded. It's also worth mentioning that predefined tokens hold a lot of value. I know, shocker. Our cards that make these tokens rarely do only that, with some giving us enhancements to the token's effects, or ways to put them to unusual purposes, or even just rewards for sacrificing them. But even if we discount the cards that make these tokens, the sheer quantity of the tokens themselves makes a serious impact on the game. Clues draw us cards, Thopters can swing in or block, and of course our treasures can help us cast whatever we may need to cast, including whatever we couldn't cast if we exiled it from the top of an opponent's library when we cast our first spell that turn. But why do we run so many tokens? Because our commander is both an etheric visionary and a thieving monkey. The more artifacts we have, the more likely we are to be able to nab a spell from the top of an opponent's deck and cast it for free. We reach through the blind eternities to a zone altogether unknown to our plane, namely our opponent's library, and commit an act of piracy that doesn't just put us ahead, it denies our opponent that same resource. Nice. And honestly, even though that's what our deck is built to do, including a few other spells that enhance or supplement our larcenies, it functions pretty great even without Rashmi and Ragavan on the board. It turns out artifacts are strong. Even a little bit of synergy goes a long way, and we have a lot of it. Cards that burn our opponents when our artifacts hit or leave the battlefield, cards that repurpose our clues or foods or treasures, cards that ramp us or give our creatures evasion, or just hide our token creation under layers of replacement effects. We have it all. Add in a few ways to turn our arsenal of artifacts into creatures and swing in, or even just win the game outright, and we're left wondering why we need our commander in the first place. But Rashmi and Ragavan is the true heart of our deck. Under their supervision, we play our Teamer artifact strategy and get rewarded for it with another strategy entirely, namely playing our opponent's decks against them. Between ways of seeing the tops of our opponent's libraries and ways of stealing their cards beyond just what our commander gives us, It's like our board is divided between our own synergistic game plan and a hodgepodge of our three opponents' decks, jury-rigged together into a contraption only a mad scientist like us could love. It's like we're two players at the table, an inventor with a snowballing artifact strategy, and an ape with a pile of chaos, and both are a threat. Choosing to deal with one is choosing to die to the other, and our opponents are weighed down by the need to defend themselves against our toys, their other opponents, and their own threats. A brass monkey that they never really get off their backs. You'll enjoy this deck if you like getting to play a straightforward strategy in combination with spinning the wheel every turn, and if that feels like the best of both worlds. Or if you think it sounds fun to have piles of prototypes that always come together for some monkey business. So as usual, this Mox Field list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will find a considering section filled with cards that I ultimately decided did not make the cut in my deck, but it's a great place to get started if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you have a different focus that you want to go with than what I chose, or if you have a totally different idea for your own Rashmi and Ragavan deck. That's a great place to get it started in that considering section. So let's get started with our own first section, which is artifact tokens. We have 30 cards that make artifact tokens and do other fun things with them. Starting with the simplest one of all, it's Strike It Rich. A single red mana for a sorcery to create a treasure token. Pretty great. We remember that our commander makes us a treasure token whenever we cast our first spell each turn as part of exiling the top card of our opponent's library, or of target opponent's library. But Strike It Rich gives us another way to get a treasure out, which we can of course use to add to our artifact count or use for mana. We can also flash Strike It Rich back from the graveyard for 2 and a red, get ourselves another treasure. Might as well. Next we have Biomechan Engineer. This is a green and a blue for a 2/2 Insect Artificer that when it enters, we make a Lander token. Lander tokens are Wayfarer's Baubles. They're an artifact that we can pay to, tap, and sack to Rampant Growth. Search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So again, adds to our token count, but also if we're really looking for mana, we might as well just sacrifice this and we can go find whatever basic land we need. We can also, later in the game of course, pay 8 mana into the Engineer and draw 2 cards and make a 2/2 Robot artifact creature token, which maybe we are using this Lander to ramp ourselves into the 8 mana to make a robot token. So that lets us have more and more repeatable ways of getting artifacts in play in the form of these 2/2s and drawing us cards in the process. Also from Edge of Eternities is Biotech Specialist, a red and a green for a 1/3 Insect Scientist that, again, when it enters, we make a Lander token. And whenever we sacrifice an artifact, it doesn't have to be a token, just any artifact at all, this creature deals 2 damage to target opponent. So we get a free shock on top of whatever we would have gotten off of that token. That includes our treasure tokens. So if we sacrifice 5 treasure tokens for 5 mana, we're also doing 10 damage to an opponent, or, 2 damage in 5 instances to our opponents, however we want to. So a little bit of burn for us there. Collector's Vault is next, and I don't have this tagged as a draw effect because it lets us loot, but it is good for card selection for us. So for 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that if we pay 2 and tap it, we draw a card, then discard a card, and we make a treasure. So at the very least, we're getting a little card selection, and we're getting a treasure into play. So it's like a 1 mana rebate of the 2 we paid into it. We can do this every turn, just continuing to draw a card and then discarding the card we need least, and get a treasure for our trouble. So yeah, pretty nice. Next we have Lonus, Cryptozoologist, really cool card from the Simic. Green and a blue for a 1/2 legendary Snake Elf Scout that says whenever another non-token creature we control enters, we investigate. We've got quite a few creatures in a deck that's mostly about artifacts. Investigate, of course, is the keyword ability that just means make a clue. And as we'll see, clues are predefined artifact tokens that say pay 2 and sacrifice this, you don't even have to tap it, and you draw a card. However, you don't have to do that if you want to increase your artifact count, since Lonus makes us clues every time our non-token creatures enter, but also we can tap Lonus and sacrifice any number of clues, and target opponent reveals the top that many cards of their library, and we can put a non-land permanent with mana value of that amount or less from among those onto the battlefield under our control, and then everything else goes in the bottom of their library in a random order. So a nice way for us to get a little bit more thievery going on with Lonos. Seems nice. Next we have Academy Manufactor. This is 3 generic mana for a 1/3 artifact creature assembly worker that has one of our many replacement effects in this deck. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail soon. But Academy Manufactor says if we would create a clue, a food, or a treasure, instead we make one of each. So we get to choose if we're making a clue, let's say, because Lonos is having us investigate. Academy Manufactor sees that event about to happen, the making of the clue, and instead it replaces it with one of each. That's all it is. Pretty simple. Whenever Rashmi and Ragavan makes us a treasure, Academy Manufactor is going to see that treasure, and it's going to make one of each of these instead. Pretty good. Crack Open is next. This is 2 and a green for a sorcery that says destroy target artifact or enchantment and create a treasure token. It's just naturalize, but it costs 1 more, and then it turns that 1 more into a treasure for us. So pretty good. I guess naturalize is an instant. This is a sorcery. Go with me. It's fine. So Forensic Gadgeteer is next. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 Vidalcan Artificer Detective from Murders at Karlov Manor that says whenever we cast an artifact spell, we investigate. We have a lot of artifact spells, of course, so we're going to be able to get a lot more clues. And activated abilities of artifacts we control cost 1 generic mana less to cast, but this effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So our clues we can sacrifice for a single generic mana. Our landers we can sacrifice for a single generic mana. We don't have to worry about this for our treasures, of course, because they don't cost mana to activate, but our food we can sacrifice for just a single generic mana. So this can really be helpful to us, in addition to making a bunch of clues for us whenever we cast artifact spells. Next up is Oko, Thief of Crowns. I know, he's back. It's a Simic deck, or rather it's a Teamer deck, so we've got Simic colors in us, so we can run Oko, and Oko is actually pretty sweet in this deck. For 1, a green and a blue, we get a 4 loyalty Oko Planeswalker with incredible abs, and a +2 ability to create a food token. So just repeatable artifact token generation for us. We can also +1 Oko to make target artifact or creature lose all abilities and become a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. This is repeatable removal, essentially. We can take an opponent's commander and just make them into a 3/3 elk, and they lose all other abilities. If they have a way to sacrifice it or attack with it and have it die and then go back to the command zone and play it again, great, we can do this again. Because for whatever reason, this ability is a plus loyalty ability rather than a minus. Oko Thief of Crowns is a ridiculous planeswalker. In addition, if we feel like it, we can exchange control of target artifact or creature we control and target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less. This is more thievery for us that I don't believe I've actually tagged as thievery, just the same way I didn't with Lonos, because they aren't likely to come up as often as their other effects, but a little bit of thievery there if you want to throw that in. Next we have another replacement effect in Peregrine Took. 2 and a green for a 2/3 legendary halfling citizen that says if 1 or more tokens would be created under our control, any tokens of any sort, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead. And then we can sacrifice 3 foods to draw a card. So a nice outlet for our foods that we can turn into cards. So I know you're thinking, well, does that go infinite here? Because if we make, let's say Lonos makes us a clue, which would make the Academy Manufacturer make us a clue, food, and treasure instead. But then Pippin sees that and makes an extra food. But we make that food and it makes 1 each instead. But then, no, that's not how it works. It's 1 event. The event is investigate, making a clue. That is affected by 2 different replacement effects, 1 from the Academy Manufacturer and 1 from Pippin. So we can order them in either way we want, and if they still apply, then we apply the second one as well. So if we were to do Lonos and apply the Manufacturer first, then our clue becomes a clue, food, and treasure, and Pippin is seeing 1 or more tokens be created, so we're adding an extra food. So we would make a total of a single clue, a single treasure, and 2 food. However, if we applied it the opposite direction, Lonos wants us to make a clue. Pippin sees us making a token, so has us make a clue and an extra food on top of it. Academy Manufacturer sees us making a clue, so it makes 1 of each, and a food, so it makes 1 of each. So if we apply the replacement effects that way, we end up with 2 each of clues, foods, and treasures. So We don't have to apply it in that direction, but that does end us up with, instead of investigating and getting a single clue, we get a total of 6 artifact tokens. Seems pretty good to me. Academy Manufacturer is worth $5. So yeah. Next up, we have Saheeli, Sublime of Artificer. This is another Planeswalker for 1 and hybrid blue-red mana. So that means we can cast this for 1 and double blue, 1 and double red, or 1 a blue and a red. It's a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, Saheeli, that says whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we make a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. These are another token type. It's just a little artifact creature, and that's pretty nice for us, and adds to our artifact count. We can also -2 Saheeli to take target artifact we control and have it become a copy of another target artifact or creature we control until end of turn, except that it's an artifact in addition to its other types. What if we have a servo in play, and we know we're about to investigate? We can -2 Saheeli to make our servo into another Academy Manufacturer if we've already got one in play, which would mean we'd make so many clues, foods, and treasures, and it's only until end of turn, but still pretty nice. Next up, we have Sai, Master Thopterist. 2 and a blue for a 1/4 legendary human artificer that says whenever we cast an artifact spell, we make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So very similar to Forensic Gadgeteer, except rather than a clue, we get a 1/1 flying Thopter. And we can pay 1 and a blue and sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. So a little bit better rate here than Pippin, in terms of only having to sacrifice 2 artifacts, but it does cost us mana, and Pippin only costs us sacrificing 3 foods. It just, Sai could be any artifacts, and Pippin's gonna be food. So yeah, good to have a little redundancy there. Next up, we are running Skyclave Relic as our Manalith for this deck. 3 generic mana for an artifact that can tap for 1 mana of any color. That's a Manalith. But this also has Kicker for 3 generic, meaning we can pay a total of 6 when we cast it. It is indestructible, and when it enters, if it was kicked, we make 2 tapped tokens that are copies of it, which means we get 2 tapped but indestructible additional Skyclave Relics, so Manaliths. So when we cast this for 3, no matter what, we're getting a 3 mana rock that we can tap right away. If we cast it for 6, we're getting a 3 mana rock we can tap right away, and 2 more that we can tap once they untap next turn. And all of them are indestructible. Pretty good. Stride Hanger Automaton is next, another one of our replacement effects. 3 generic mana for a 1/4 artifact creature construct that gives all of our Thopters +1/+1. And it says if 1 or more artifact tokens would be created under our control, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying are created instead. So similar to Pippin, but Pippin triggers on 1 or more tokens, and Stride Hanger Automaton triggers on 1 or more artifact tokens. Most of our tokens in this deck are artifact tokens, to be fair, but we want to remember this only triggers on the artifacts. Pippin triggers on any tokens. So yeah, make a little Thopter in addition to anything else. Tireless Provisioner is next. This is 2 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Scout with Landfall. Whenever we have a land come in, we either make a food or we make a treasure. Pretty good. Usually we're using this to make treasures, although food is fine as well. Just that treasure is usually a little bit more useful to us since it can help fix our mana and ramp us. But if we're looking for life gain, nothing wrong with food. Or if it looks like we may need more card draw, Tireless Provisioner can make us food. If Pippin is in play, we can use that food, sacrifice 3 of them, and draw a card. So our landfall becomes card advantage. Next, the first Tireless thing is Tireless Tracker. This is 2 and a green for a 3/2 Human Scout with landfall, investigate. So this is the way we make our clues rather than treasures and food, which is what the Provisioner does. Also, whenever we sacrifice a clue, we get to put a 1/1 counter on the tracker, so it gets a little bit bigger as we follow the clues. Next, we have Big Score. This is 3 and a red for an instant that requires us to discard a card as additional cost. But then it draws us 2 cards and makes 2 treasures. So technically, it's not really card draw, but it does feel like it at the time. And we get 2 treasures in the process, so pretty nice. Cutthroat Negotiator is next. This is 2 blue and a red for a 4/3 Orc Pirate with Parlay. Whenever this creature attacks, each player, including us, reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, we make a tapped treasure, and then each player draws a card, meaning that card that they revealed. This does interact some ways with things like Teferi's Ageless Insight, but generally it just means everyone is going to draw a card, and they show the cards first, and any of those cards that wasn't a land, we get a tapped treasure token in the process. Pretty good. We can't use those treasures right away since they are tapped, but we can use them, we can have them affect our artifact count if we're going to be casting a spell post-combat, and that's our first spell for the turn with Rashmi and Ragavan. Harried Dronesmith is next. This is 3 in a red for a 2/3 human artificer that basically gives us a Thopter at the start of combat, and we get to keep it until our end step. At the beginning of combat, make a 1/1 Thopter. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So adds to our artifact count. Again, if we're going to do our first spell during or post-combat. And at least it gives us that Thopter, which with some of our other effects might mean more Thopters, more food, more of everything, you know, just depending on how we're doing it. Yeah. So yeah, Harried Dronesmith is a nice way to add to our count, you know, and have a Thopter. Who wouldn't want another Thopter? Next is Jolene the Plunder Queen. This is the one from the new Capenna Commander decks, not the new Jolene from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So this is 2, a red and a green, for a 2/2 legendary human warrior that says whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. That means whenever we attack an opponent, we get a treasure, and whenever anyone else attacks someone other than us, they get a treasure. So this encourages our opponents a little bit to attack each other rather than us. Hey, you can attack me, but if you attack someone else, you'll get a treasure for it. And Jolene says whenever we would create 1 or more treasure tokens instead, create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. So it's the same thing that Pippin has, except it's only treasures, and it only triggers on treasures, or Stridehanger Automaton, which is to say it makes a treasure in addition to any other treasure. So it's the most restrictive of them so far. However, we are making a treasure basically every turn with our commander. All we have to do is cast any spell, and we exile the top of target opponent's library and make a treasure. So Jolene means we make 2 treasures. And then, if we want to sacrifice 5 treasures, we can do so to put 5 1/1 counters on Jolene. This is an instant speed. If we have enough treasures, and it's not hard to get to it, we can make Jolene go from a 2/2 to a 12/12. It's just sacrifice 10 treasures. Pretty sweet. We could do that after blockers have not been declared against her. Yeah, I'm just saying, very neat. Next, we have Mechanized Production. This is a very kind of a weird card for this deck, but it makes sense why we would run it. For 2 and double blue, we get an aura that enchants one of our artifacts. So we might put this on our Academy Manufactor, for example, or our Stridehanger Automaton, or we could just attach this to a clue if we really want to. That might be good. Even to putting on a treasure is fine, even though those are artifact tokens that are meant to be sacrificed. Because at the beginning of our upkeep, we make a token that's a copy of the enchanted artifact. And then, same ability, if we control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, we win the game. So this does not say those artifacts have to be the same name as the artifact we have enchanted with this. So if we just have 8 or 9 artifacts that are all treasures, then at the beginning of our upkeep, we'll make a copy that's a token that's a copy of whatever Mechanized Production is enchanting, which does not have to be a treasure. And if we happen to then have 8 treasures, we win the game. So this is a nice little sneaky win con that as long as it survives 1 turn cycle, a lot of the times it just means we win. So this is kind of our Felidar Sovereign for the deck, if you want to think of it that way. Yeah, lots of fun. Next we have Storm the Vault from Rivals of Ixalan. 2, a blue and a red for a legendary enchantment that says whenever 1 or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we make a treasure token. So it's like Curiosity, except it makes treasures rather than drawing us cards. Is that just as good? Well, at the beginning of our end step, if we control 5 or more artifacts, we transform Storm the Vault into Vault of Catlacan. Vault of Catlacan is a legendary land that taps for 1 mana of any color, or taps for an amount of blue equal to the number of artifacts we control. This is Tolarian Academy, in addition to being able to tap for just 1 mana of any color if we needed to. So this is an enormous amount of ramp for us in this deck especially. So yeah, very nice for us. Thopter Spy Network is next. 2 and double blue for an enchantment that says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control an artifact, we make a Thopter, a 1/1 flying artifact creature token. And whenever 1 or more artifact creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So it does say 1 or more. So that means if we have a bunch of Thopters deal damage to a player, we only draw 1 card. But if we have Thopters deal damage to more than one player, for each player we've done damage to with those artifact creatures, we draw a card. So yeah, we can get multiple cards off of this, we just have to spread out our damage among our opponents. Whirler Rogue is next. This is 2 and double blue for a 2/2 human rogue artificer that enters and makes 2 Thopters, and then we can tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to make one of a target creature unblockable. So this is very sweet, because we can tap our 2 Thopters that this made to make our commander unblockable, or make Jolene unblockable when Jolene is really big, or we want her to be big. But it does not say target creature that we control. So we could look at opponent A attacking opponent B and see that maybe they could kill opponent B if not for opponent B being able to block. So we say, hold on, before blocks, I'm going to activate this Whirler Rogue, tapping a treasure and a clue to make your biggest creature unblockable. And opponent B is like, oh, that just kills me. And we say, that is correct. So we can really mess up other people's combats. We can also use this politically and say, look, opponent A, I know you want to attack opponent B with your commander because you want to get that commander damage win. Or I know you want to attack opponent B with those 2 creatures because you've got a coastal piracy in play and you want to draw some cards. I've got enough artifacts to tap to make those things unblockable, but what will you give me in return? Will you leave me alone for a turn? Will you leave me alone for a turn per creature I make unblockable? That's pretty good. 1 turn cycle for every card you're getting. Not a terrible rate. Plus the combat damage from it and protecting your creatures. And they might say, yeah, I'll go with that. Go ahead and activate it. And we'll say, no. You have to attack with your creatures first, because if we activate it before you attack with them, you might attack us and those creatures still can't be blocked. And they'll say, oh, it's not just one of your opponents. And we'll say, yeah, it could be anyone. So we don't want you to hit us with it. And they'll say, okay, I will trust you. I will declare these attacks. And we'll say, all right, before attacks, we tap our artifacts and make your creatures unblockable because we are honorable. And we're going to win with our honor. So next up is Mechan Assembler, also one of our Edge of Eternity's cards. This is 4 and a blue for a 4/4 artifact creature robot artificer that says whenever another artifact we control enters, we make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token, but only once each turn. So this is every turn, because our commander is going to be making a treasure whenever we cast our first spell every turn. So that treasure is going to come in, it's an artifact entering, we're going to make a robot in addition to it, and now we've doubled our artifact count for the artifacts that were just made this turn so far, let alone all the other artifacts we have, including the assembler itself. Pretty good. Next we have Roxanne, Starfall Savant. I know you're thinking, we have a Jolene and a Roxanne? What are these mono-word lady name song creatures? All I can tell you is Roxanne is stronger than Jolene, at least in OTJ Limited, because I lost a lot to Roxanne in it. So this is 3, a red and a green, for a 4/3 legendary cat druid that says whenever she enters or attacks, we make a tapped colorless artifact token named Meteorite. With, when this token enters, it deals 2 damage to any target, and tap to add 1 mana of any color. So we're making mana rocks, but not just mana rocks that shock something, that hit a player or a planeswalker or a creature as soon as they come in. Meteorite is a 5 mana card that does exactly this. And Roxanne gets us 1 when she comes in and when she attacks. In addition, whenever we tap an artifact token for mana, add 1 mana of any type that artifact token produced. So that includes these meteorites. While Roxanne's in play, once these things untap, they tap for 2 mana each. And this is also true for our treasures. So we can tap treasures for 2 mana, which is Goldspan Dragon. That's incredibly strong. So yeah, Roxanne, very helpful for us. Next we have Tamiyo's Journal. This is 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact that just lets us investigate at the beginning of our upkeep, just making clues every turn. And if we tap it and sacrifice 3 clues, we can Demonic Tutor. We search our library for a card, put it in our hand, and shuffle. So we don't even have to reveal it. It's Demonic Tutor. So that's tapping down Tamiyo's Journal, which is itself an artifact, so adding to our artifact count. And it does cost us 3 clues. But we're likely to have quite a few clues, even if all we've done is just wait 3 turns for Tamiyo's Journal to make us those 3 clues. We can go and then find whatever we may need. Bootlegger Stash is next. I love being able to fit this into any deck that it can fit into, which is unfortunately not that many decks. This is 5 and a green for an artifact. It is an artifact, not an enchantment, even though it seems like one. That says lands we control have tap to create a treasure token. What this means is we can tap our lands instead of for whatever other abilities they have, like making mana, and just make treasures. So those treasures don't come in tapped, so we can then tap those treasures, sacrifice them immediately, even without Roxanne, and they're making any color of mana. So in a way, this is sort of a roundabout, your lands tap for any color of mana. But in our deck, it's more like during our opponent to the right's end step, any lands we have untapped make us a treasure. Then we untap, and we've got all those treasures ready for us and adding to our artifact count. So Bootlegger Stash also, of course, itself adds to our artifact count, but very nicely makes us plenty of treasures that we can use to ramp into things, to add to our artifact count for our commander, to trigger any other replacement effects we've got going on. Very nice with us. Next, we are running Brutaclad Telcor Engineer, using the Multiverse Legends printing of it. This is a sweet, sweet card and can really get out of hand and could even be kind of a finisher for us. So for 4, a blue and a red, we get a 4/4 legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Artificer, that gives all of our creature tokens haste. Don't have a lot of creature tokens in this deck. But at the beginning of combat on our turn, we make a 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mirror artifact creature token, and then we choose any token we control. We don't have to, we may, but we can choose any token we control, and all of our tokens become those tokens. So if we have, 5 clues, 3 treasures, a food, and we make this mirror, we can then choose that mirror, and now we don't have any tokens except mirrors, and we've got 10 of them, since that's the total number of tokens we had. If we want to turn all of our tokens into clues, or food, or treasure, whatever we may need, that includes that 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mirror artifact creature token. All of our tokens become the same thing, if we choose for them to. They don't revert back at the end of the turn. That's just permanent. So we've got to be careful when we use this. But if it were to turn out that we have, something that's making all of our creatures into something quite large, like we'll see later on, we can make all of our tokens into that. Pretty nice. Brutaclad really can finish things off for us, or can really change things for us if we are like, God, I've got so many clues. Oh, but Brutaclad's here. All right, I'm going to cast Brutaclad, go to combat, make all of my clues into treasures, since I have 1 treasure at least, since I probably cast Brutaclad and thereby triggered Rashmi and Ragavan to make a treasure. So now all of my clues that I was sitting on are treasures, and I can use them for mana to cast whatever spells I need. Finally, we have Saheeli's Artistry. This is 4 and double blue for a sorcery that says choose one or both. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact, or create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this generally means make 2 token artifacts. One that was from an artifact, which could be someone's soul ring, including our own, could be another bootlegger stash, or it could be just a second treasure. And make a copy of target creature, which could be anything on the battlefield, except probably our commander, because we don't want to have to legend rule it, or any of our other legendary creatures. But we can hit a legendary creature on an opponent's board, and if we don't already have a copy of that card, now we do. We can get the biggest, scariest thing, like maybe a big artifact Galta into play, or maybe just an opponent's commander would be really good in our deck too, so we grab that as well, in addition to making that token of just an artifact. And if we want, this is target artifact and this is target creature. Well, what if there's an artifact creature on the board? We can get that as the artifact or as the creature. So we might be able to get 2 creatures out of this, or 2 artifacts out of it if you wanted to look at it that way. So yeah, very nice. And that is our section of artifact tokens. I have one more small section for our game plan, which is theft. We did see a couple of other cards that could go in this section, and if you want to put them in there, you're welcome to. But these are cards that really just let us steal things or steal copies of them from our opponents to let us play their strategy. We've already seen Saheeli's Artistry, so we can steal an artifact and a creature by making copies of them. We're also running Stolen Strategy, and we're doing the Fallout printing because it's just a lot of fun, and it's good science. 4 and a red for an enchantment that says at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of each opponent's library. And until end of turn, we can cast spells from among those cards, and we can spend mana as though it were mana of any type, any color rather, to cast those spells. So this is a card that's drawing us 3 more cards every turn, essentially. They're just from our opponents. We do have to cast them, but we cast them as though they were only asking for generic mana, and of course colorless mana if they have colorless mana in their costs, because this is not mana of any type, it's mana of any color. Which normally wouldn't be a problem for us anyway, since we've got treasures. It's just worth noting, if someone's playing like an Eldrazi deck, and their spells actually have colorless mana symbols in those costs, we cannot spend any of our mana that isn't itself colorless to cast those. That's the one restriction. But being able to play our opponent's cards, maybe get some lands off the top of their library. We can't play their lands, unfortunately, because we can only cast spells from among those exiled cards, not play cards. But yeah, this is a great way for us to steal their strategy in addition to what we were doing otherwise. And of course we have Mind's Dilation, which is 7 mana, don't get me wrong, but it's a great enchantment that says whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, it does not say on each of their turns. So if an opponent casts flashes in a creature on our turn or on a different player's besides their own turn, this still counts. Anytime any opponent casts a spell, and it's the first spell during that turn they cast it, they exile the top card of their library, and if it's a non-land card, we can cast it without paying its mana cost. So it's a free spell for us, much like it might be from our commander, or it's a land that we're getting off the top of their library, so we're getting closer to another spell we can cast with our commander. Mind's Dilation, very expensive, but very powerful in our deck. So that is our theft section. We're going to go into the several sections we have that supplement our game plan, but before we do, I want to look at these sections of support for our game plan, starting with our card advantage section. And as usual, I've used the word draw as a tag, just to shorthand this card advantage section. Doesn't necessarily mean all of these cards do the action of drawing us a card. Just gives us a chance to touch more cards and be able to do more things with them. So like Biomech and Engineer, we can pay 8 eventually to draw 2 cards and make a robot. So that's good draw. Cryogen Relic is next. This is 1 and a blue for an artifact that when it enters or leaves the battlefield, we can draw a card, so it replaces itself when it comes in. And we can pay 1 and a blue and sacrifice it to put a stun counter on up to 1 target tapped creature. That creature has to be tapped, it's worth it, but we can stun them, and because we're sacrificing this, it will leave the battlefield and draw us a second card. So pretty nice for that. Idol of Oblivion is great in this deck. For 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that we can just tap to draw a card, but we have to have made a token this turn in order to activate this at all. Oh no! The thing that we do every time we cast our first spell in our turn when our commander's in play. We make a treasure token, we can immediately tap Idol of Oblivion to draw a card after that ability's finished resolving. So yeah, generally guaranteed extra card every turn once we get going. We can also, if we want, pay 8, tap and sack the Idol to make a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Not usually going to happen, but if we've got enough mana, and we've got Brutaclad in play, and a bunch of artifact tokens, we can make this Eldrazi, go to combat, make the Phyrexian Mirror, choose the Eldrazi with Brutaclad, and now all of our tokens are 10/10 Eldrazi. That might be enough to just kill someone, or everyone. Next up, we've seen Lonas. Lonas lets us draw in the form of making clues, but also we can use Lonas to steal a card from the top of our opponent's library by sacrificing some clues. We're running Mind Stone, which is really more of a mana rock in this deck. It's a 2 generic mana artifact that taps for 1 colorless mana. But we can also, if it's late in the game and we don't need the mana anymore, we can pay 1, tap, and sack the Mind Stone to draw a card. So cash it in for a different card. Sarenth Steelseeker is next. This is 1 and a green for a 1/2 Human Artificer Scout that says whenever an artifact we control enters, we look at the top card of our library, and if it's a land, we can reveal it and put it in our hand. And if we don't put it into our hand, we can put it in our graveyard. So it's sort of like a Surveil, except rather than leaving it on top, so we can leave it on top or we can put it in our graveyard, but if it was a land instead, we can put it directly in our hand. So this is just kind of drawing us a land and also getting lands off the top of our library for us to find more of our spells. We've seen the Forensic Gadgeteer. It investigates every time we make an artifact, or we cast an artifact spell rather. Peregrine Took can sack 3 foods to draw us a card. Sai we can pay 1 and a blue and sack 2 artifacts to draw a card. The Tireless Tracker makes us clues. Uthros Researchcraft is a spacecraft, which is to say this is 2 and a blue for an artifact spacecraft with a station ability, meaning we can tap at sorcery speed any other creature we control and put a charge counter on the research craft for an amount of charge counters rather equal to the power of the creature we tapped. We can only, again, do this as a sorcery, and as it gets more charge counters, it activates these abilities, or it sort of turns them on. So once we've gotten up to 3 or more charge counters on this, so all we have to do is tap our Tireless Tracker once to it. It now has the ability, whenever we cast an artifact spell, we draw a card, and we put an extra charge counter on the research craft. So once we put it to 3, we generally don't need to put any more on it. We can if we want, but we don't have to keep stationing it, because every time we cast an artifact spell, we're just getting more charge counters on it. But if we feel like stationing it, that's fine. And once we have stationed it up to 12 counters, it is now a creature and has flying, and it's a 0/8 that gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. So pretty likely to be just huge /8, because it's going to be at least a 1/8 since it itself is an artifact. So yeah, pretty good way for us to draw cards and eventually get paid off with a big flyer. We've seen Big Score, draws us 2 after we discard 1, so there you go. Cutthroat Negotiator lets us parlay, so even though we're revealing the top card of our library, we are drawing it, as is everyone else, and we're getting maybe some tapped treasures in the process. Rashmi Eternity's Crafter is next. This is the original Rashmi from original Kaladesh block. 2, a green, and a blue for a 2/3 Legendary Elf Druid that says whenever we cast our first spell each turn, reveal the top card of our library. We may cast it without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with lesser mana value. And then, if we don't cast it, we put it in our hand. So it has to have lesser mana value than our first spell each turn, which encourages us to play a big spell as our first spell each turn, but you never know. It might get us a free casting of a spell, and if it doesn't, we just put it in our hand, so that's just, at the very least, whenever we cast our first spell each turn, we reveal and draw the top card of our library. That's alright. Dr. Spy Network can let us draw a card whenever one or more of our artifact creatures deal combat damage to a player. Tamio's Journal makes us a whole bunch of clues, and we can use them to Demonic Tutor. Shimmer Dragon, originally printed in the Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks, I believe the Alayla deck. 4 and 2 blue for a 5/6 flying dragon that, as long as we have 4 or more artifacts, it's hexproof, so it can't be targeted by spells or abilities our opponents control. And we can tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to draw a card. We don't have to sack them, we just tap them. So if we've got 6 treasures that we're not using, we can just tap them 2 at a time to this ability and draw 3 cards. And we've still got those treasures available to us, adding to our artifact count, and next turn when they untap, we can do this again or tap them and sacrifice them for mana or any combination. Shimmer Dragon's a great card for this deck. As is Thought Monitor. For 6 and a blue, we get a 2/2 artifact creature construct with flying that when it enters, we draw 2 cards. However, it also has affinity for artifacts, meaning it costs 1 generic less for each artifact we control, which oftentimes in our deck means this is a 2/2 flyer that draws us 2 for a single blue. It's the best Muldrifter you'll ever see. So that is our card advantage section. Let's go toward our acceleration, which again I've just shorthanded here as ramp. So of course we're running Soul Ring. Soul Ring is a single generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. It's extremely powerful, great in our deck, especially for the mana sinks that we have in a couple of places, like our Biomechan Engineer that has us draw 2 cards and make a robot. If we pay 8 into it, Soul Ring's great for that. Striker Rich, we've already seen, makes us a treasure when we cast it or flash it back. Arcane Signet is an untapped 2-mana rock. 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this deck, blue, red, or green. Untapped 2-mana rock that fixes our mana perfectly, sounds great. Biomechan Engineer, we just talked about it. It can make us a lander token, however, which is a Wayfarer's Bauble, which is ramp for us. Same is true for Biotech Specialist, also comes with a lander token. Collector's Vault makes us treasures when we use it to loot. Felwar Stone is another untapped 2-mana rock, but this makes one mana of any color a land an opponent controls could produce. So if our opponents are all on nothing but black and white, then this makes black and or white, which is still fine. We can use this for our generic mana costs. But if even one opponent is on blue, then this is making blue for us whenever we need blue, and that's great. An untapped 2-mana rock that only gets better the more diverse our opponent's decks are is very good for us. I put this in every deck that's at least 3 colors, and some that are just 2. Mindstone we've already seen, 2-mana rock that taps for colorless, or we can cash it in later to draw a card. Crack Open can make us a treasure token after we destroy an artifact or enchantment with it. Heaped Harvest is next from Bloomburrow. This is 2 and a green for a food artifact that says when it enters and when we sacrifice it, we may Rampant Growth. Search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And it has the food text of pay 2, tap, and sack to gain 3 life. So we can sacrifice this to its own ability, to any other one of our sacrifice and artifact abilities, and we get a Rampant Growth effect from it whenever we sacrifice it, as well as when it enters. So very nice for us. We've seen the Skyclave Relic. It is a manalith that maybe makes 2 copies of itself if we kick it. Tireless Provisioner gives us landfall, make a food or a treasure. Big Score makes us 2 treasures. Cut the Throat Negotiator makes us a tapped treasure for each non-land card revealed when we parlay. Jolene makes us extra treasures every time we would make it, makes us an extra treasure every time we would make a treasure, and gives a player who attacks one of our opponents a treasure, which includes us. Storm the Vault gives us a treasure whenever one or more creatures of ours deal combat damage to a player, and obviously, once we, at the beginning of our end step, control 5 or more artifacts, can flip it into a Tolarian Academy, which is pretty good acceleration. Roxanne makes tapped meteorites that, when they are untapped, can tap for 1 mana of any color, and if she's still in play, 2 mana of any color. And Bootlegger Stash gives our lands the ability to tap to make treasures, which doesn't actually accelerate us in that same moment, since we could have tapped those lands for mana, but this does fix our mana, and if we were getting those treasures into play and not using them, then the next turn we can use them, and that's the acceleration. So that is our acceleration section. We have an interaction section, as usual. It's tagged as a removal, just as a shorthand again. We're running Lightning Bolt because it's a red deck, and this is a single red for an instant that does 3 damage to any target. Why are we even talking about it? Lightning Bolt is an incredible card. You don't have to run the Strixhaven Mystical Archive printing, but I do love it. I like to use these as often as I can for everything except, I think, D-Spark. Anyway, yeah. Abrade is next. Another standard for my red decks. 1 and a red for an instant that either does 3 damage to a creature or destroys an artifact. Just good flexible card for not too much mana. Cryogen Relic removes something in the sense that it can put a stun counter on a tapped creature, which is a little... Normally, I think of tapping things down as evasion. Lets us get past them rather than actually taking them out. But putting a stun counter on something takes it out for a little longer. So I count it as removal. It's sort of on the bubble, but that's where we went with it. And it does draw us cards and increase our artifact count. Dragonspark Reactor is 1 and a red for an artifact that says whenever this artifact or another artifact we control enters, we put a charge counter on the reactor. And we can pay 4 and sacrifice the reactor to have it deal damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to a player and to a creature. They don't even have to be a player and a creature that player controls. It could be a completely different creature in the battlefield entirely. So this is great removal for a creature and nice burn for a player. And it gets bigger and bigger as we do the things our deck is doing anyway. Crack Open, as we've seen, destroys an artifact or an enchantment. Ghirapur Ether Grid is 2 and a red for an enchantment that lets us tap 2 untapped artifact we control to have it do 1 damage to any target. Again, direct damage is great for removal, it's great for burn. This is the same way of tapping things that our Shimmer Dragon has. So if we don't want to draw cards, which how often do we not want to draw cards? But if we don't need to draw cards, we can use this to burn out our opponents and burn up their creatures and planeswalkers. Imprisoned in the Moon is a great way to remove someone's commander or any other creature or planeswalker. For 2 and a blue, we get an aura that enchants a creature, land, or planeswalker and makes that permanent into a colorless land that taps for colorless and has it lose all other card types and abilities. So if we lock down an opponent's commander with this, and they don't have a way to either interact with their own lands, sacrificing or bouncing them or whatever, or interact with an aura, then their commander is just going to tap for mana, and they're not going to have access to it for the rest of the game. Pretty sweet. Oko, we've already seen, can turn a any artifact or creature into a 3/3 elk that loses all other abilities. That's pretty good repeated removal. Roxanne comes in and makes these meteorites, which shock something. And then we have Junkwinder, which I love and which works great in this deck. This is 5 and double blue for a 5/6 serpent with affinity for tokens. That means it costs 1 generic less for each token we control of any sort. So this might be a 5/6 serpent for double blue, and that's all. And it says whenever a token we control enters, tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. This is templating that these days would probably use a stun counter, but it works essentially the same way. However, we can keep tapping the same thing, and it never gains more quote-unquote stun counters. It's always just next untap step. But at least it's tapped down. And with the amount of tokens we're making in this deck, we can end up tapping down quite a few creatures to give us a sort of pseudo-evasion, maybe tapping down the entirety of an opponent's board. And then we swing in, and that's it for them. Also, I want to call out this wonderful Campbell White art with this huge serpent who's friends with some squirrels. That's why he likes tokens. Why he likes tokens? Yeah. So that is our interaction section. We are running 1 Wrath. It is Blasphemous Act. This is 8 and a red for a sorcery that costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield and does 13 damage to each creature. Sometimes we gotta wipe the board. And if we do, that's fine. Blasphemous Act will help us do it. Hopefully, we can do this at a time when it costs just 1 red, or like 1 or 2 and a red. And hopefully we have enough tokens, particularly treasure tokens, left in play that we can immediately replay our commander and get back to work. So that is our 1 Wrath for the deck. Let's go over our supplemental sections right now. We're going to start with our Payoffs. These are cards that reward us for doing all the things we're doing in this deck anyway. So Biotech Specialist, as we've seen, can do 2 damage to an opponent when we sack an artifact. We're doing a lot of that, either in the form of just using our treasures or cracking our clues, to other things like the Dragonspark Reactor, which we can pay for and sacrifice to do damage equal to the number of counters on it to a player and to a creature. And of course it gets those counters by us just having artifacts enter, including itself. Saren's Steel Seeker also triggers when our artifacts enter, and either lets us essentially surveil, or if we see a land on top, we can put it in our hand. Academy Manufacturer rewards us for making clues, foods, and treasures by giving us 1 of each of the others. So we're doing a lot of that. Ingenious Artillerist is from Baldur's Gate. It's a 3/1 human artificer for 2 and a red that says whenever 1 or more artifacts we control enter, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. So if we make, a clue and we have our Academy Manufacturer in play, we're going to end up making a clue, a food, and a treasure. The Ingenious Artillerist is going to see 3 artifacts enter and thereby do 3 damage to each opponent. Very strong for us. Peregrine Took rewards us for making tokens by giving us an extra food on top of it. Saheeli rewards us for casting non-creature spells by making a servo for it. Stridehanger Automaton, whenever we make an artifact token, we're going to also make a Thopter. Tireless Tracker is going to get counters on it whenever we sacrifice a clue. Uthros Researchcraft gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control once it is stationed up to 12 charge counters. Now we have, like the Ingenious Artillerist, we have the Weftstalker Ardent. This is 2 and a red for a 2/3 Drix Artificer that says whenever another creature or artifact we control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So pretty similar to the Artillerist, except it triggers on creatures as well as artifacts. And we can also warp it for a single red, which means it enters the battlefield when we cast it for just 1 red rather than 2 and a red. And at the end step, we will exile it, and then from exile, we can cast it on a later turn for its regular cost. So if we don't have enough mana to play it for 3, or we have enough mana but we want to use that mana for other things, other ways we're going to get creatures and or artifacts into play, we can warp this in for 1, cast whatever else we're casting, have those creatures and artifacts enter. This will deal a damage to each opponent for each creature and artifact that does enter, and then it goes away, and we can cast it again on a later turn for just 2 and a red. Seems great. Big favorite card of mine from the last year. Storm the Vault, of course, rewards us whenever our creatures deal combat damage to a player, which we're going to be doing anyway. Mechan Assembler rewards us whenever we have an artifact to enter. Once each turn, we get an extra 1 in the form of a 2/2 robot. Kappa Cannoneer is next. This is 5 and a blue for a 4/4 artifact creature Turtle Warrior with Improvise. We don't have much Improvise left in this deck since I cut it down. Improvise is sort of like Convoke, but for artifacts. Each artifact we tap after we're done activating mana abilities pays for a generic mana of this. So it's possible for us to just pay a single blue and then tap 6 clues, or 5 clues rather, and that casts our Cannoneer for us. This is a Ward 4, 4/4 creature that says whenever it or another artifact we control enters, we put a 1/1 counter on it and it can't be blocked this turn. So it protects itself, it becomes unblockable pretty much every turn if we're casting our first spell for the turn pre-combat, and our commander's making a treasure, thereby triggering this. It's going to get bigger, it's going to be unblockable. Very, very nice. And it is a little bit of removal bait, because our opponents are going to see how strong it is and want to get rid of it, which is going to force them to not only use their resources to remove it, but also their mana to break through the ward to do so. So those are resources not being spent to remove something else of ours, like the Academy Manufactor or our commander itself. Shimmer Dragon, as we've seen already, gets hexproof if we have 4 more artifacts, and we can use our artifacts to draw cards with it. And Junkwinder has affinity for tokens, which we're making a lot of tokens, and whenever those tokens come in, it does something great for us, tapping down our opponent's non-land permanents. So those are our payoffs. But we have a little bit of synergy as well. These are cards that aren't like rewarding us for what we're doing, they're just, they work with it in a way. For example, Uthos Researchcraft, it rewards us, I guess the payoff of it is drawing us cards when we cast artifact spells. The synergy of it is it counts the number of artifacts we have when it's a creature, and that is its power. Forensic Gadgeteer, similarly, makes it so all of our activated abilities from our artifacts cost 1 less to a minimum of 1, so that's pretty good for synergy. Lantern of Insight is great in this deck because it's a single generic mana for an artifact that makes everyone play with the top card of their library revealed. We can tap and sack it to make a player shuffle, but we don't want to do that. There's only one instance in which we'd want to do that. Generally, the reason we do this is because we want to see which opponent has the best card on top, so that when we trigger our commander, we can find exactly the card that we're able to cast and that is most powerful to cast from our opponent's tops of their libraries. If everyone besides us, or with us, has just a land on top, that's too bad. We want to be able to cast spells. So Lantern of Insight gives us that insight, of course, to be able to figure that out. Very strong card. Strionic Resonator is 2 generic mana for an artifact that if we pay 2 and tap it, we can copy a triggered ability that we control and choose new targets for the copy. Our commander's ability is a triggered ability. When we cast the first spell on each of our turns, it triggers. So we can have that ability trigger, target an opponent, then activate Strionic Resonator before that ability resolves, copy the ability, and target either that same opponent or a different opponent. And we can, for each of the instances of that ability, the original and the copy, we're going to make a treasure, and we're going to hopefully get to cast a spell, because why would we target them if we didn't want to cast a spell off the top of their library? And like Strionic Resonator, we have Lithiform Engine, which interestingly does a lot more than the Resonator, but costs a few dollars less. I guess it just costs a couple of mana more. For 4 generic mana, we get a legendary artifact with 3 abilities. We can pay 2 and tap it to do the same thing that the Strionic Resonator does, copy an activated or triggered ability. I guess it can hit activated abilities, and the Resonator can only hit triggered ones. This can do both. We can pay 3 and tap it to copy an instant or sorcery that we control. We are running a few instants of sorceries, so that's a possibility for us, and we get to choose new copies for those, or new targets for those copies. Or we can pay 4 and tap it to copy a permanent spell we control. Now, this is only a spell, so it has to happen while this is on the stack. We can't just make a copy of something that's already in play. But maybe, you know, I'm gonna keep using this as an example. Maybe we cast our Academy Manufactor and we've got 4 more mana, so we copy that spell on the stack and we'll get 2 manufactors, the original and the token copy. So yeah, Lithiform Engine, very nice for us here as well, for the same reason as the Resonator. Lantern of Insight, though, can't be overstated how good this is. There is a 4 mana blue creature card in the Considering section that also has this first ability. So might be worth running if you find that when you build this deck, your Lantern of Insight is doing so much for you, because it generally will. So that is our synergy section. We've talked a little bit about how we can burn our opponents. We've seen all these cards, but we'll look at them. Biotech Specialist does 2 damage to an opponent whenever we sack an artifact. Dragonspark Reactor, when we sack it, does an amount of damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to an opponent and to a creature. Gyropore Ether Grid, we can tap 2 artifacts to do a damage to any target. Ingenious Artillerist and Wefstalker Ardent, even though they're templated differently, they care about our artifacts entering, or artifacts and creatures for the Ardent, and they do that much damage to each opponent when those things enter. And Roxanne, whenever she enters or attacks, makes us a Meteorite, which can do 2 damage to any target. A little bit of burn for our opponent's faces. We have this other token section, which is just about making tokens that may not be artifact tokens. Sahili's Artistry, as we've seen, does make a token copy of an artifact and a copy of a creature that is also an artifact, but since this can make a copy of a creature, maybe that's the reason we're using it in that moment, because we really want a creature copy. So even though that's an artifact, I have included it in this section. Idol of Oblivion, as we've seen, mostly is here to draw us cards basically every turn, but can make a nice 10/10 Eldrazi for us. And Lithoform Engine, if we make a copy of a permanent spell we control, we're going to get a token that is a copy of that, which might just be a creature. So those are our tokens. We have an Evasion section that includes Whirler Rogue, as we've already seen. We can tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to make one of our creatures unblockable, but we also have a Cyberdrive Awakener. This is 5 and a blue for a 4/4 artifact creature construct with flying. It gives all of our other artifact creatures flying, and when it enters, each non-creature artifact we control becomes a 4/4 artifact creature we control until end of turn. So if we have 10 clues and treasures and food and whatever else we may have in play, when this enters, they all become 4/4 creatures. They're all still artifacts, and all of our other artifact creatures have flying. So it turns all of our little tokens that aren't already creatures into angels until the end of turn, 4/4 flyers. So this is one of our big finishers. We can swing in and just slam a jamma. It's also really nice to be able to bring the Cyberdrive Awakener back and do it again if we're able to recur it, which we have a way of doing, or if we're able to copy it, which we have ways of doing as well, as you've already seen. So that is our Evasion section. We have one Recursion card, which is Emry, Lurker of the Loch. 2 and a blue for a 1/2 legendary Merfolk Wizard with affinity for artifacts. So as long as we have 2 more artifacts in play, Emry is just a single blue for a 1/2. When she enters, we mill 4 cards, which isn't exactly what we're doing in this deck. We do have a couple of other things like our Collector's Vault that put cards in our graveyard. And the reason is because Emry, we can tap in order to choose an artifact in our graveyard, and we're able to cast it this turn. So Emry, once per turn, lets us cast an artifact from our graveyard. We just have to pay its costs and still follow the timing rules, but she lets us recur any of our artifacts in our graveyard that we may want to recur. That's extremely strong for us. So if our Cyberdrive Awakener dies, we can just bring it back and get its interest trigger again. If none of our opponents have anything good on top of their library that we can tell with Lantern of Insight, we can sack the Lantern of Insight to force an opponent to shuffle, and hopefully now they do have something better on top of their library. Then we can use Emry to bring that Lantern of Insight back. Pretty good. So yeah, lots of good uses for Emry, and just very powerful as a way for us to use in this deck, of course. So that's our Recursion section. Our last section of spells is our finishers. These are cards that are meant to end the game for us. We've already seen the Cyberdrive Awakener. It makes all of our non-token creatures, or our non-creature artifacts rather, into 4/4 artifact creatures, and of course gives them flying, at least until end of turn. Mechanized Production is our alternate win con, so we might be able to get a victory here. Rise and Shine is 1 and a blue for a sorcery that makes target non-creature artifact we control into a 0/0 artifact creature, and we put 4/1/1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way. So for 2 mana, we sort of get to Ensoul Artifact in a way. We take one of our non-token or non-creature artifacts and make it into a 4/4 until end of turn. That's not bad for 2 mana. Make a clue into a 4/4. But we can overload this for 4 and double blue, and that's what this is in the deck for. If we do that, we take all of the instances of target in this text and change them to each, meaning each non-creature artifact we control becomes a 0/0 with 4/1/1 counters on it, and that's not until end of turn. the way it is with Cyberdrive Awakener. So if we were to Rise and Shine, all of our non-token or all of our non-creature artifacts are now creature artifacts. So they're susceptible to things like Wrath of God and what have you. But hopefully we have quite a few of them, and they're now all 4/4s, and even though they don't fly like the Cyberdrive Awakener lets them fly, we can swing in with them every turn, that they remain alive, of course. So yeah. And last, we have Displaced Dinosaurs from the Doctor Who product. Really, really fun for a 5 and double green 7/7 dinosaur that says, as a historic permanent we control enters, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types. Historic means anything that's a legendary, anything that's a saga, or anything that's an artifact. So all of our legendary creatures are going to come in as a 7/7 dinosaur. If we have any legendary artifacts, they're going to come in as a 7/7 dinosaur, not just because they're legendary, but because they're artifacts. If we make a clue, it's going to come in as a 7/7 that we can pay to and sack to draw a card. So it doesn't lose any of its text. It's just also a 7/7 dinosaur. This does not apply to anything that's already in play when the Displaced Dinosaurs enters, the way that Cyberdrive Awakener and Rise and Shine care about what we already have in play. Displaced Dinosaurs builds up toward our future. So it's every artifact that we're getting in play, plus of course legendary, once we've cast our 7-mana dinosaur. But yeah, it's a 7/7, it does work on its own. So yeah, pretty good. That is our Displaced Dinosaurs, and that is the end of our spells in this deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base. So I want to start with our basics. We're only running 14 basics in this deck, including only 2 forests. So even though we have some lander tokens that can search for these, usually we aren't going to need it because we have a lot of other green sources in this deck. We're mostly blue, and even with 5 mountains and 2 forests, we're making the same, we have the same number of lands that produce red as that produce green for us, so this ends up working out totally fine. We are running 6 artifact lands though. These are all lands that have the artifact type as well, which means they count toward our artifact count. They don't count toward any of our effects that say when you cast an artifact spell, but they do count toward any of our effects that say when an artifact you control enters. So we play our land drop as Great Furnace, and an artifact we control has entered, so we might draw a card or make a token, whatever our effect may be that we're looking at. So what we have are 3 untapped lands, Great Furnace, Seat of the Synod, and Tree of Tales, that are all monocolor, red, blue, and green. And then we have 3 bridges. The bridges are all work the same way. They are all tap lands that are artifact lands. They are all indestructible, and they all tap for one of 2 colors of mana. So Silver Bluff makes blue and red, Slagwoods makes red and green, and Tanglepool makes green or blue. So if you don't want so many more artifacts in your deck with these, you don't have to run them, but I think it's generally worth it. It just helps out a lot and helps with your mana base. We're running 2 bicycle lands, and I should mention for these basics, normally I like to run more basics in my library, but we're about to, right now, as of this recording, it's March in 2026. So we're about to, next month, see the Secrets of Strixhaven set hit shelves, which is going to introduce and complete the bicycle and tango land cycles. So we're going to be able to get the red-blue bicycle land and tango land. I recommend picking it up, maybe replacing basics with them, maybe replacing artifact lands with them if you don't want to run these bridges, either way works fine. But yeah, just fill out the cycle. We just can't do it yet because they haven't spoiled those cards yet. So Rain-Slicked Copse is our example for the bicycle lands. These are typed duals, so they inherently tap for the colors of the types they are. So Rain-Slicked Copse is a forest island, therefore it taps for green or blue. It does enter tapped, but we can also cycle it for 2 generic mana, meaning later in the game, when we don't need the land, if we don't feel like playing this as a land, we can pay 2 generic and discard it from our hand to draw a card. So yeah, Rain-Slicked Copse is green and blue, and Sheltered Thicket is red and green. Once we get the blue and red one, we'll be able to complete the cycle here. We're running all 3 check lands in our colors. Check lands, like Hinterland Harbor, are lands that enter tapped unless we control one land, or unless we control a land that has a subtype of one of these 2 colors, and it taps for those 2 colors. So Hinterland Harbor, if it comes in and we have a Sheltered Thicket, it's going to see that we have a forest, since this is a forest, and it will come in untapped. I usually like to run the check lands in my decks if I've got at least 18 to 20 cards that have those basic types. Right now, we're just on the edge of that with 14 basics, 2 bicycle lands, and 2 tango lands. So these are totally fine. If you want to upgrade these, you could upgrade to slow lands for a little bit more consistency, since they come in untapped as long as you have 2 lands of any type ahead of them or more. But they're also more expensive than the check lands, and these are pretty great. So yeah, that's why I run these. Here are 4 fixing lands. Of course, we're running Command Tower. It is a land with the same text as Arcane Signet. So in our deck, it taps for blue, red, or green. It comes in untapped, so it's an untapped tri-land. So yeah, we're going to run that. We would run this if it came in tapped, like Path of Ancestry, which comes in tapped and has the same text as the Command Tower. In addition, it says if we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry one. Now there are 3 other elves in this deck, but there are no other monkeys in this deck. However, our commander shares types with itself, of course. So if we cast Rashmi and Ragavan with the Path of Ancestry's mana, we're going to get a scry off of that, which is pretty sweet. Even if not, this is a land that taps for all 3 of our colors, comes in tapped, and that's a fine trade-off. We're running Exotic Orchard as well. If Command Tower is Arcane Signet as a land, Exotic Orchard is Felwar Stone as a land. It has the same text and comes in untapped, makes 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce, so pretty nice. It's also the case that if an opponent has an Exotic Orchard, then our orchard taps for any color of mana that our lands can produce, because our opponent's orchard sees our lands, and our orchard sees their orchard. So yeah, pretty nice for us. Also, untapped land source that makes multiple colors. Pretty good. Finally, I know not everyone loves Temple of the False God, but we've got it here because it's good for us. It taps for 2 colorless mana, comes in untapped, but we can only activate it if we control at least 4 other lands, so 5 or more including itself. So if we have our opening hand is like a forest and a Temple of the False God and no other lands, we probably want a mulligan. But if we are able to get this out on turn 5 with 4 other lands in play, or sometimes even earlier than that if we've been able to ramp our lands somehow, then it can really accelerate us in a powerful way. And it's great for the power level of decks that I built for this channel. We're running all 3 scry lands. These are lands that come in tapped, tap for 1 of 2 colors, and scry 1 when they do. When they come in, that is. So very strong, useful lands for us here that are much less expensive than the Surveil lands, which is what you might upgrade to with these. And yeah, just nice to be able to get a scry that's guaranteed, even if it's not repeatable, like the conditional scry we get from Path of Ancestry. So all 3 of our color combinations. Just like with the bicycle lands, we have our tango lands. We want to add the blue-red one once it comes out. But for now, we have Cinderglade as our example. This is a mountain forest, so it taps for red or green, of course. And it comes in tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. Now, we don't have that many basic lands in this deck compared to what I'm usually running. We're down to 14 in this deck. So this is likely to come in tapped, but that's fine. We get a tap land with this. It taps for our 2 colors. It could be a lot worse. If you wanted to add more basics, you could just cut the tango lands and instead run those artifact lands that we've already seen. Or you could cut the artifact lands, since they don't have the basic types, and run more basics in their place, which makes it more likely for Cinderglade to come in untapped, that sort of thing. So a little bit of a balance there. I guess you could also, cut the scry lands, but I like those. Anyway, we've got both of the 2 tango lands that we're running here, and if you wanted to upgrade these, shock lands are a fine option, just like they would be for the bicycle lands. We're running our 1 tri-land in our colors, the Frontier Bivouac. It comes in tapped, taps for all 3 of our colors, so it's a worse Path of Ancestry, which is a worse Command Tower, and it's still worth running. If you wanted to upgrade it, Ketria Triome exists, but again, all these upgrades I'm talking about cost much more money than just the lands that I've put in here. Finally, we've got these 3 utility lands. Demolition Field is the one answer that I tend to put in my decks to problematic non-basic lands. I know most of the pods that would play a deck of the power level of the decks I built for this channel, they don't smile on land destruction or mana denial. But you have to have something to be able to address a problematic non-basic that an opponent controls. A Voltron player who's attacking unblockably with their Access Passage or Rogue's Passage, or Access Tunnel or Rogue's Passage, or a control player who's playing Glacial Chasm and stopping people from hurting them. Any land that's empowering someone else's game plan or preventing us from winning with ours is fair game. So Demolition Field is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls, and that opponent then gets to search their library for a basic and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, but we've gotten rid of a problem at the table that was bothering us and probably someone else. And, it was a threat that they had for us, or something empowering their game plan, so it's fair for us to get it, especially when we replace it with an untapped land. Fountain Port is next. Fountain Port is from Bloomborough. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it and sack a token to draw a card. So this sort of turns any of our tokens into clues. We are paying 3 essentially by tapping 2 and this land, but still, being able to have a surfeit of treasures and pay a little bit of mana to sacrifice one of them to draw a card is pretty nice flexibility. We can also pay 3 and tap it and pay a life to make a 1/1 blue fish creature token. Not going to do that often in this deck, but it's nice to be able to have an extra token. And of course, that does trigger things like Junkwinder. Or if we've got extra mana and we want to make more tokens that are just treasures, we can bank that mana by paying 4 and tapping Fountain Port to make a treasure token. So good flexibility in this utility land. Similarly, we have the Shire. This is a legendary land that enters tapped unless we control a legendary creature, like our commander. It taps for green, and we can pay 1 and a green and tap it, and tap an untapped creature we control, so maybe a creature that we're not attacking or blocking with, like our commander, and we can make a food token. So 1 more extra token for us, helps out with our Academy Manufactor, or our Junkwinder, or just our token count. Very nice. And that about sums it up. Again, I've made a deck for all of the March of the Machine Legends with 3 exceptions. The last 3 non-face cards from the Commander product. So let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on those next ones, and if you want to check out my playlist for all the other March of the Machine Commander decks I've built, it's linked in the video's description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe. Ring that bell if you want to be notified when I post a new deck. Let me know in the comments if there's something you'd like to see. And remember, most of all, that Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.